the Higher School of Economics in Moscow. She used to be a member of the National Television Academy and was a presenter for Radio Liberty Moscow. And since 2011, she is the Dean of the Media and Communication Department. Timothy Carr, to my left, is the Senior Director of Strategy at Free Press, where he's in charge of the Internet freedom and international media rights campaigns on net neutrality and Internet freedom, propaganda, and public media. Before joining Free Press, Tim was Executive Director of MediaChannel.org and Vice President of Global Vision New Media, and he has extensive experience as an editor, reporter, and photojournalist, among others for AP, Time, and the New York Times, and the Huffington Post. He has also his own blog, which is Media Citizen. And last but not least, from Berlin, Leonard Novi, who is Director of the Institute for Media and Communications Policy in Berlin. He studied history and politics, holds a master's degree, PhD from Cambridge. He is visiting scholar at the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik and a fellow at Harvard University. And his academic work focuses on politics, political communication, and democracy. And he is also a co-publisher of a blog, Carta.info, which is one of the leading German language politic blogs, I would say. So now that you know who is sitting here, I'm pleased to hand over to Philip, who will start the presentation a little bit on we are going viral now. We will learn a little bit of how news will be shared and distributed in those new networks. Philip.
Yeah, I'll use approximately the next 10 minutes to talk a little bit about the DNA of viral news, what news stories users actually are sharing, commenting, and liking on social media. And as Christian said, I'm a journalistic lecturer at University of Southern Denmark, and also I'm a developer. So the tools I'll show you, I have developed myself. So I'm a hacker a bit. I've developed two projects. One is called iLike, and the other one is called Viral News. The iLike project is a research project which aggregates news stories from several Danish news sites, and then 5 days after publication, it stored the statistic on how many times it has been shared, liked, and commented on several social media. The other one, Viral News, is a practical tool, you could say, for Danish news media, because that focus on news content the last 24 hours. So every 4 hours it pings Facebook and Twitter and so on, and ask how many times it has been shared. So that's a real-time impression on what stories that goes viral in Denmark. iLike is more a research project of mine, not a it updates automatically on the web as well, but it's more a research tool for me instead of a tool for the journalist. These are the media I monitor every day, and it aggregates 3,800 stories in average per day, and ask Facebook and Twitter and so on for the statistic about these stories. So that's a bit of data I have collected because I started in April 2011. So there's do the math yourself, but that's several thousand stories I have collected. And these are the social media I get data from: Twitter, Facebook, Google+, Pinterest, LinkedIn, Reddit, Dig, Delicious, and StumbleUpon. And if you just had a wild guess by media attention, you'll probably say that these three social media was primarily used in Europe, but that's for sharing content, of course. But that's actually a lie. Google+ is out of the picture, and LinkedIn is at the third place. Facebook is the dominant social media in Denmark, is the preferred tool, the preferred social media when it comes to sharing, commenting, and liking stuff from Danish news media. And this is the graph. The first one is Facebook, and then Twitter, LinkedIn, Google+, Delicious, Reddit, StumbleUpon, Pinterest, and then 0 with Dig. So that's a bit scaring to see, actually. And by looking at this graph, you could actually argue that Facebook has a monopoly on sharing news stories in Denmark. And you could argue that, but there is a but. and that is, of course, we're still using email as a way to share news stories. So I don't believe that Facebook has a monopoly, but we should take this very seriously. Facebook is the dominant social media in Denmark. Yeah, we'll just skip that and go ahead. This is the average for every story is shared 3 times, liked 8 times, and there's 5 comments for every story published. That's the average, but is a complete lie. Because, I just have to move this a little bit, I think. Down, in that corner there.
The projector.
Down in the corner, you can actually see the viral stories. It's so insignificant amount of stories that actually goes viral. That's the graph. It's access is sorted out by stories shared, liked, and commented. Total amount on Facebook. So very, very few stories actually goes viral. It's rare. I think it's like 5 stories a day in Denmark that gets more than 400 social interaction on Facebook in total. 400. That's probably 5 or 6 stories a day. That's not that many. So what stories are going viral in Denmark? And for the serious journalist, I have some sad news. This story is about 90% of the who applies for Christmas help is Muslims. That's a fun story, at least. This is a video clip of a woman pooping in a supermarket. This is a video clip of Burger King in an ugly case about animal cruelty. This is, you probably know, this video is 2 Dutch men trying on some stuff so they can feel how painful it is to give labor. And that's a viral story, and we have to remember this tonight. Beer makes men smarter. That's the most shared, liked, and commented stories from Danish news media. That's it, and that's a bit saddening, I think. Another example, just to you give an impression on the DNA of viral stories. This is 2 of the biggest stories in the last half a year in Denmark. The one on your left is a story about conflict between a union and employer, who has changed, overenskomst, please. Sorry, I can't remember. A contract with something about pay. Yeah, that has been published 1,399 stories, and that has been told 142,000 interactions. The other story is about a dog who were to be put down because the dog bit another dog, and so on, and then the law, and blah, blah, blah. And then a policeman dressed up as a policeman and went out to an animal center and stole the dog. And that spun 64,000 interaction. You can see only with 119 stories. So that's not that many stories to spawn that many social interaction. That's a bit scary, I think. But then there's a but. Only a few stories actually generates these interaction. The big story in the first one with the conflict in the town of Vejle in Denmark is the conflict in Vejle is okay. That spun 12k interaction. And my love for animals overruled my morale as a police officer, spun 9,000 interactions. So a few stories get the attention. Very, very few stories get the attention from news media. And I've so you have something to come home with. I've tried to create just some punchline. If it's fun, then it gets shared. If it's a good cause in some way, and it's fun, of course, it gets likes. And if it's provocative in some way and fun, don't forget fun, it spawns comments. So fun is a significant element in this calculation. Just some beats or some area that is more shared, liked, and commented than other. Breaking news, personal politics about politicians, and personal, so it has a direct effect on me. That's 2 things actually. Entertainment, close to home, something that is, very close to me. That's something There's some stories that affects me directly. Internet humor is of course also a thing that goes viral, and indignation, that's a key word as well. And for journalism to be shared, it has to have a precise angle, it has to be provocative, easy to understand, with an edge, and a video doesn't harm in any way if it has to go viral, and a creative headline. That's the sixth component that has to be in place if a story will go viral big time. Yeah, and that was it. That was the DNA of viral news. Is there room for one little surprise? Actually, I have a little surprise in my bag. Just I'm launching a new tool. Don't tell anybody. It's first until next week. I'm totally launch it, but I'm launching Viral News Nordic Edition. So I'll gather news stories from both Denmark, Sweden, and Norway and collect them into one big homepage, and then you can actually see what the difference are between the three countries. And of course, the journalists can use this tool to steal the good stories from other countries. So that's a two-way strike. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Thanks also for the surprise. Maybe I should have told everyone that this is live streamed on the internet, so you know
that doesn't matter. It's okay.
So we'll see whether it goes viral or not.
Yeah, that's all right.
Thanks for your presentation, and we will continue this little scene-setting presentations on how social media work and how they change our society with Anna Kashkayeva. Please, you have the floor.
Я прошу прощения, что вы некоторые видите эту презентацию по-русски, но из картинок вам будет понятно, потому что мой замечательный коллега больше показывал руками, я тоже попробую больше показывать картинками, а не руками. В этой книжке моя статья была связана с тем, как, собственно, журналист профессиональный должен работать с социальными медиа, и зачем они ему, собственно, нужны, и как он там себя чувствует. У нас пока нет в России такой замечательной платформы, не говоря уже вот о таком замечательном молодом ученом, который наблюдает за тем, как новости вирусно распространяются. Но я вам попробую рассказать на очень простом кейсе минувшей недели, как, собственно, все то, о чем сказал Филипп, реализуется и в России. На минувшей неделе на такой же вот большой конференции в Московском государственном университете заместитель министра связи и массовых коммуникаций России сказал, что журналистов надо учить жизни правильно, они должны работать на хозяина, быть послушными и не пытаться менять мир. Это очень такая внятная цитата, довольно популярная среди нынешних руководителей медиа, которые считают, что журналистика только бизнес и нужно работать на того дядю, который платит деньги. Так и было сказано. Мы сейчас не обсуждаем позицию министра, то, что в университете, конечно, затопали и засвистели. Мы обсуждаем, что случилось в медийном поле в этой связи. Он сказал это вот в закрытом пространстве, там не было онлайн-трансляции. Барышня, журналист, опубликовала блог, в котором и привела несколько цитат из этого выступления. Это была суббота, и этот блог появился, и это тоже новая совершенно реальность последних пары лет, когда в традиционных журналистских редакциях есть специальные люди, которые наблюдают за тем, что происходит в блогосфере, и, по сути дела, ищут нужные новости и размещают их на официальных сайтах. Дальше одновременно блог появился на портале очень известной радиостанции «Эхо Москвы», сразу собрал несколько тысяч кликов и комментариев. И тут же одновременно его начали обсуждать в Фейсбуке. Так же, как и в Дании, Facebook после «Контакта», есть в России ВКонтакте, и там в основном школьники и не московские интеллектуалы, как их называют, пребывают, а вот Facebook – это люди, которые считаются такими лидерами мнений во многом. Тут же появилось, это вот кусочек моей страницы, тут же появилось обсуждение профессионалами всего, что происходило. И что тут получилось? Получилось, что мы наблюдаем, с одной стороны, перепост в журналистику, не знаю, можно ли это перевести буквально, но это термин, который в России все чаще используется, потому что во многом он, с одной стороны, характеризует то, что происходит в блогосфере, которая воспроизводит редакционный процесс, а с другой стороны говорит о расширении интерпретаторского сообщества вот в социальных сетях, тем самым отчасти помогая медиаграмотности людей, которые включаются в эти дискуссии, а с другой стороны развивая некоторую корпоративную профессиональную культуру, о которой в России почти не говорят, потому что традиционные медиа во многом не выполняют функцию такого вот общественного канала. Я говорю прежде всего о телевидении, в этом есть проблема. И, наконец, в течение 2 дней вот обсуждений главным образом в сети, и, кстати, благодаря тому, что обсуждали в сети, выяснилось, потому что люди, находящиеся в Фейсбуке и в сетях, очень мало смотрят телевизор. Наверное, для всех это не секрет. Выяснили, что господин министр, замминистра, все-таки выступал еще и на государственном телевидении, то есть она снимала репортаж. И там он говорил как раз под камерой и на агентские ленты о проблемах журналистского образования. И говорил о том, что нужно готовить универсальных журналистов, что новые вызовы мультимедийной среды, технологий, то есть все, как полагается, очень внятно и грамотно. А вот все то, что обсуждалось в сети и не попало в эфир государственных каналов, это были ответы на вопросы по поводу того, как и зачем должны работать журналисты. И вот после 2 дней такой перепалки, казалось бы, замминистра мог бы никак не отреагировать. Но все-таки в понедельник, вот буквально перед моим приездом сюда, в большой газете «Известия» он отвечал и объяснял свою позицию. Вот таким образом, это один из довольно типичных в России нынешних кейсов, когда сеть, хочет она того или нет, чрезвычайно влияет на повестку дня, и для большинства населения страны неясно, почему замминистра или другой министр вдруг по какому-то поводу оправдывается или объясняется в эфире Большого канала, но вот эта цепочка, сеть и традиционные медиа очень часто работает именно таким способом. Еще один пример, который сейчас в России тоже очень важен, потому что сеть, в отличие от очень агрессивного контента во многом на телевидении, выполняет отчасти такую роль эмоций и лайков, ну, того, что называется вот мы друг с другом, мы сообщество, мы друг другу симпатичны. И если мы вот посмотрим на очень успешно прошедший, всем вам, вероятно, известный формат телепрограммы «Голос», это специальный был сайт на Первом канале российском, и вот видите, количество просмотров 40 миллионов только на сайте, и специальных репортажей, которые были сделаны только для сайта, и ленты разговаривающих, лайкающих и помогающих друг другу быть сообществом, это невероятный ресурс для работы с аудиторией, которая пока не граждански активна, не очевидно готова говорить о журналистике, но она вот здесь работает уже с этой эмоциональной сферой социальной сети, потому что в такой большой стране вот это вот соединение, смотрение вместе телевизора И обсуждение этого телевизора вместе дает ощущение сообщества. Ну и, наконец, очень важная вещь, которая рождается в России уже тоже, хотя в западных странах таких примеров в минувшие пару лет довольно много, это то, что я называю таким пространством сотворчества, потому что вот все новые, последние технологии, связанные с визуализацией и интерактивностью, один из них радиопроект, другой известный вам стриминговый телепроект, наверное, знаете, это вот возможность в реальном режиме через твиттеры и сети менять актуальность повестки дня, которую навязывают традиционные медиа. Кто-то здесь мне из коллег после первой сессии сказал, что вот у нас в странах по-разному случается. У кого-то покушаются, чтобы отрезать ухо, кого-то сажают, а вот в России с этим, в общем, полегче. Но в социальных сетях работают по-другому. Например, главные редакторы многих государственных медиа собирают своих журналистов и так же, как и на летучках, определенно им говорят: аккуратнее, осторожнее. Вы работаете в государственных медиа, и, значит, в социальных сетях у вас есть ограничения по поводу того, как и о чем вы там пишете. Поэтому, завершая, я просто хочу сказать, что для журналиста профессионального это теперь абсолютно новое пространство, которое не перестало его делать журналистом, но добавило ему некоторое количество проблем, не избавило его от необходимости соблюдать закон, думать об этике и быть достаточно ответственным. Где-то, по-моему, здесь цитату нам специально повесили, что всегда читатель делает выводы сам, а мы отвечаем только за уровень дискуссий. Так вот, теперь никакой разницы нет. Происходит это на страницах в эфире традиционных медиа или в наших фейсбуках. Спасибо вам.
Thank you, Anna. Our next speaker is Tim Carr. Now that we heard that there is additional forms of journalism emerging, the next question is whether this also requires new rights for those citizen journalists, or how what challenges to the basic right to freedom of expression is connected with these new forms of reporting and journalism. Once we get the words. So, Tim.
You're now in a PC environment. I apologize. Let's see if I can find it. Hi. How's everybody doing? My name's Tim Carr. I'm the Senior Director of Strategy for Free Press. Free Press is what we call in the United States a not-for-profit organization. I think the more global term is a part of civil society. And our mission is really to advocate for universal access to open networks. Oftentimes we see a problem in the communications space and we try to solve it with the public interest in mind. And when we talk about social media news, I like to look at the larger communications context in which that exists, because it's fairly unique. And I'd also like to talk a little bit about a specific example of social media news. And that example is Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street, most of you know, was global, but it was concentrated in many ways in New York City, which is where I live. And there is social media news going on in that context that suggests problems, vulnerabilities, new vulnerabilities when we talk about news and social media. And I want to walk you through that a little bit. I should preface to say that my history is as a photojournalist. I do work now in the not-for-profit space, but when I and a lot of my colleagues who are advocates heard that this Occupy thing was going on, a lot of us were initially skeptical, and then people were like, no, they're really doing innovative things. So I played hooky and grabbed my camera and went down to Zuccotti Park, which is where the occupation occurred in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, and I started taking pictures. And you know, I took pictures of people holding signs. I took pictures of people talking to the media. People holding signs and talking to the media. And as I was looking through the thousands of images that I had taken over a period of a couple months, I realized that there was something happening in every photograph. In every photograph, there was media. And it's not the traditional media that you might think. The traditional media showed up a little late, but it was the kind of media that we all use, smartphones, cameras, etc. And it was being used in a lot of different ways. This is a picture from Zuccotti Park. They were using these, they're using cell phones not just to text, send emails, but they're actually taking pictures. They were making movies. That they were sending things out via Twitter or Facebook. In more sophisticated cases, they were using applications like Ustream and Livestream, which allow you to live stream video from your handheld camera. And even the occupation themselves set up their own media center. In the middle of Zuccotti Park, they brought in some gas-powered generators. They figured out how to tap into a Wi-Fi network that was available, and they started making media. They brought their laptops. They set up their own media center, and the idea here was that mainstream media had failed, so we were going to create a media network that connected the citizen journalist who was on the street covering events of Occupy Wall Street with people in the field who wanted to learn more about it. And they wanted to get around the traditional media structure. They wanted to get around broadcast television. They wanted to get around that. So they created their own network. And it involved 4 points that I want to talk about. And there are 4 points of vulnerability that I'll get into a little later. You had the citizen journalists, you had the Occupy journalists who were on the streets using all sorts of devices to document things. They were using applications. They were using applications like Twitter and Facebook and Storify. They were using more sophisticated applications like Ustream and others to get their message out. Those applications rode upon networks. In the United States, the most dominant wireless networks are controlled by a handful of companies. AT&T is one of them, Verizon another. And at the final stop, they were getting to an audience who, in the perfect social media structure, create a feedback loop. And then what was really interesting was not only were they creating and broadcasting news, but they were also opening up their social media stream to comments and responding. There were journalists who were out on the street who were live streaming video, doing interviews, and someone would tweet to them questions, and they were asking questions. So when this system worked, you had this great sort of news feedback loop that rode on this network. A lot of the occupiers thought that they were really innovating, and in fact they were, but in reality, there were some legacy networks there. They were just different. The legacy networks of now what is now social media, the legacy networks of what is now wireless communications. So it still had a dependency. And when that system didn't work, there were a few reasons. Oftentimes, citizen journalists themselves were arrested for merely documenting events on the streets. Another vulnerability at the application level, something we've talked about a lot, is that social media was suspended. Your Facebook page or your YouTube page could be brought down for any number of reasons. We saw a number of instances of this. On the network level, you have the threat of network blocking. This is an issue in the United States that we call net neutrality. I know that's a term that's used elsewhere as well, but it's basically the network provider increasingly now is deciding whether or not certain content is appropriate the network. And then the final problem at the audience point was a real issue of the digital divide, which is especially important with an Occupy movement that was really trying to organize poor people. The Occupy Wall Street movement was about a lot of things, but essentially it was about economic justice. And in order for them to really communicate and mobilize, they needed to reach people who were of lower income. And that's a real issue in the United States with the digital divide. So the challenge that we need to look at when we talk about social media news, especially social media news that takes on this sort of character, is how do we complete the loop? How do we make sure that all of these levels within this loop, within this larger network, are free so that information can flow back and forth? And we can look at each level again. If you look at the issue of journalists, this is a picture, some of you may know who this is. This is a fellow by the name of Tim Pool, who figured out how to use his smartphone and to videotape for live stream video from protests for more than 20-hour stretches. He had a backpack that was filled with batteries. Because most of you know your smartphone only lasts about 4 or 5 hours, especially if you're live streaming video, even less so. So he figured out how to run a live stream for 20 hours, and he would follow the protests, he would follow the police, he would live stream it, and it was mesmerizing. He had 30,000 people. This is one guy. He had 30,000 people watching his live stream. And you know, people, after a while, people started bringing him bananas, because he's like, my legs are cramping. And then within 5 minutes, someone would show up and say, we're watching your live stream, here's a banana. Keep it going. And so, you know, that's, but the problem, in what Tim was doing really caught on, because whenever there was an arrest, you saw live streamers, you saw people with cameras would show up and they would document the arrest. This was a really interesting phenomenon. But the police didn't like it. And the police started arresting journalists. They started arresting traditional journalists, people who showed up with the credentials and a press badge, but they also started arresting people merely for holding up their smartphone. My colleague of mine, Josh Stearns, documented this problem in the period from September 2012 to, September 2011 to September 2012. Nearly 100 journalists were arrested. Most of them were covering the Occupy movements. And in the defense of the police, it's kind of hard to figure all this out. You're in the middle of a protest, everybody's pointing a camera in your face. You don't know who's a journalist, who isn't a journalist, who's, you know, part of the movement, who's there just to take pictures. You don't know, and you know, this is a shot that I took which illustrates that. You have probably 20 cameras in that shot with a line of police trying to hold people back. And in their defense, they really don't know who's who, and I would say that it doesn't matter. In the United States, we have on the books a law that defends everyone's right to record. And it's an argument that's made from the Department of Justice linked to the First Amendment. The First Amendment gives you the right to record public officials going about their duties. So if you're videotaping a police officer on a public street, your rights are defended. The problem is that there are state laws in some states that don't recognize that. So in order to get this first point, to protect journalists, we need to oppose those state laws. We need to educate local police about the First Amendment right to record, and we also need to educate citizen journalists so they know that they have these rights. And we need to enlist the Justice Department, again, this is the U.S. context, they enlist the Justice Department to continue to enforce the right to record. The next level is applications, and I'll move quickly. We're near the end, I know. And so, you know, with social media, I think what we've recognized is that there's an assumption that these social networks protect free speech when in fact you're more beholden to their terms of service. It's kind of like Ethan Zuckerman said, it's kind of like holding a protest in a private mall. You think you're in a public square, but you're not. And so a lot of this is Tim Pool's Google Plus site. So a lot of these journalists and others encounter these takedown notices. And again, there's been a lot of talk at this conference about this issue of jurisdiction and the privatization of public discourse and the problems that present. It's no easy solution. And so some solutions for the second issue is to organize public pressure campaigns. There was a very good effort by a group called Move On, and the Progressive Change Campaign Coalition in the United States to get Facebook to reverse some of its procedures with regard to how groups were formed. A lot of political organizations were creating groups within Facebook, and they changed the underlying structure as to how that functioned, and a public pressure campaign actually got Facebook to back off. Establish and enforce corporate standards for protecting free speech. The Global Network Initiative, people are familiar with, is an effort to that end. And I have a lot of issues with voluntary standards for corporations that are in the social media space because I think they will not adhere to them all the time. But I think it's useful to have that be one point of pressure. And then also we need to continue to push for privacy protections. This is particularly important in countries where dissidents are using social media, and some social media sites like Facebook to some extent require that you identify yourself in order to use the site. So we need to be more cognizant of that. And then the third point again is networks. These are the actual wireless networks over which this information rides. Unfortunately, again, U.S. context, internet service providers are increasingly encroaching upon the free flow of information over these networks. The assumption made in U.S. communications law is that these are neutral networks. That is to say that when you connect to them, you can connect to anybody on the network without interference from your network provider. But in the U.S., it's changing. We saw with Comcast, which is one of the largest wireline service providers, they started blocking file sharing applications. We saw also Comcast going after Netflix, which is a very, can everybody see that? Going after Netflix, which is a service that uses your internet connection to stream movies, or threatening to do that. Verizon, which is the largest wireless, is one of the largest with AT&T, is now arguing that it's part of the internet and it has the First Amendment right to edit the internet. These are their own words. And meaning that they can take down whatever internet communications they deem fit because it's their First Amendment right to censor you. And then we also have AT&T now is getting into the issue of blocking FaceTime. FaceTime is a video streaming application that's available on smartphones. They want to block it as well. So the networks are vulnerable. And in order for us to address that solution, we need to enforce net neutrality. We need to expand unlicensed spectrums. Unlicensed spectrum is the spectrum over which Wi-Fi rides. And we need to also resist what's called data capping, which is another effort by networks to limit communications by limiting the amount of data that you can use. And it's a way of sort of stifling innovation over networks by tamping down on your ability to use data. They apply it in unreasonable ways. And finally, I want to just mention the last point of this loop, audiences. In the United States, we have a digital divide problem. There are nearly 28 million Americans who can't get access to high-speed internet services, and a third don't or can't get online. That's a slightly different statistic because there are people who you simply can't find it because it's not available in their community, but there's also a population of people who don't want to get online for whatever reason. And there's legitimate reasons, I'm sure. And also U.S. broadband is expensive compared to other developed countries. So in order for us to help service this loop, we need to fund more public and private initiatives for broadband. There was a recent effort under the Obama administration stimulus plan to funnel about $9 billion into something like this. It falls far short of what's needed. Support municipal networks. These are things that cities are trying to do to create sort of Wi-Fi clouds that will allow people to log on to a wireless internet connection without a great deal, without having to rely upon the few commercial providers that are available. And we also need to deal with our competition problem in the United States. We have what's called a duopoly, where it's usually a single cable or telephone company that provides you with your internet connection, and because there is a lack of competitive choice, services go down, prices go up. So that's one of the things that we need to address. So really, in completing the loop, to really making this kind of model of social media news thrive, we need to address these 4 things, and I've summarized them here. As demand everyone's right to record, make applications, those are social media applications, safe to use, protect open networks, promote universal access. And thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for the very multifaceted presentation. You can see that's a very complex issue. We will continue with the presentation by Liz Henry. Now that everybody can, or the line is blurred between traditional professional journalism maybe and that what other people do, call them grassroots journalists, citizen journalists, or anybody can do something that looks and feels like journalism. The more important it also gets to tell facts from fiction, to deal with all these information that is available online, and Liz will tell us a little bit more about that.
Sorry, if I can get this plugged in. Hi, is this working?
You need to
Turn it on, okay. Hello, I'm Liz Henry, and I'm here to talk at Christian's invitation about crowdsourced fact-checking and to tell the story of my role in the Gay Girl in Damascus incident or series of revelations and investigations of internet hoaxes in 2011. It's not working.
Yep.
Sorry. Oh, I think I know why. One moment. It's multiple desktops. Sorry. That's right. No? That's very odd. I would like my slides to work. It's plugged in?
It is plug in.
Yeah. Do you want me to put it on a USB? Yeah, I was thinking.
As we
Maybe the display. Thank you. Mirror. That's better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
As we already learned, this new technology just doesn't make it easier necessarily.
Yes, so crowdsourced fact-checking. I'm a writer and blogger. Gay Girl in Damascus, Amina. Amina Abdul Araf al-Omani was a blogger who began writing on the internet, well, at least blogging, in February 2011, just after the Tahrir Square protests began in January. And I was alerted as a web producer for a women's online media company that focuses on women blogging around the world. I was sort of alerted by many people that this blogger was in trouble. Oh my God, blogger in trouble. She's been detained. Her cousin logged into her her Blogspot blog and reported that she had been, bundled into a car. There were many details of the men who arrested her, and I was very perturbed. To the Blogmobile, I went, to the internet to write about it, to tell other people to write about it. Editors at my company began working on it. And I also began contacting human rights activists to find out who knew about it and to spread the word, to try to, to save Amina. There was fairly instantly, the same day, there was a Free Amina campaign started. She had a special hashtag. People made activist art for her, with this photograph, with this art of her photograph online. Her girlfriend was giving interviews with the media. Her girlfriend was in Montreal, a woman named Sandra, and was saying, my God, my partner has been arrested. We have to bring international attention to this case. As the story began developing over that first day, I think it was maybe June 6th or 7th, no new news, no new facts appeared over that day. No one had met her in person. No word came from her family. Her family wasn't contacting any activists or organizations. There was no reason for the cousin to lie about what had happened. No confirmation, no one could find confirmation of Amina's existence. She was supposedly a dual citizen of Syria and the US. So as the day continued, I would have expected the news cycle to reveal some little new facts. When I started feeling suspicious of her story in general, I noticed that all the facts of her case came from her own blog. So I wrote a post on my personal blog, which doesn't really have that many readers. I have maybe more Twitter followers, so people were coming into the blog and helping with the investigation. So some people were very offended or said, oh my God, I've known Amina for years online. I'm her Facebook friend. I know all about her life. I see her every day. I've seen her pictures. Then Andy Carvin, who you may have heard mentioned before, works for NPR. He has thousands of readers on Twitter, and he was very heavily following and involved with transmission of information with the Arab Spring in general. He had thousands of people emailing him and writing him and Twittering to him. I had maybe dozens of people involved with my, maybe several hundred comments, but I had quite a lot of people for me, but not for Andy. We started to collect information, so my blog became a collection point for people who were doing this investigation as just an amateur interest, or because they felt passionately they wanted to save Amina from being arrested and tortured or killed, and then felt betrayed at the realization that she may not be real or genuine in some way. One thing that happened among these amateur investigators is that we all had to check each other out, because once you're involved in one of these hoax investigations, you don't know who you're working with. You don't know if they're real or not. You don't know if they're the original hoaxer talking to you and engaging you, which often happens in my experience. And we were also, I don't think this is really a story of bloggers versus journalists, because we were in close communication with the journalists who were involved, with Esther Adderley of The Guardian and with Melissa Bell and Liz Flock from The Washington Post, and other reporters who were deeply interested in the story because they had been following Amina's blog for months. This turned into a huge collaborative investigation. We did share things on Google Docs and other sharing tools, as well as emailing each other enormous emails and files and things. And one of the things I think the hoaxers don't realize, that all the people they're talking to are talking to each other too, because I think something about the psychology of a person doing that is so self-centered and so narcissistic at times that they don't realize that other people are talking about them. So actually, I should just mention that led into, as we uncovered Amina's real identity as Tom McMaster, a guy from Edinburgh, a guy from the US really, but who had just moved to Scotland. We also uncovered an enormous other nexus of fake online lesbian bloggers, including the main editor of a news and activism site called Les Get Real, Paula Brooks. So meet Amina, Tom McMaster there, dude, Palestinian rights activist from the University of Georgia, I think, and Bill, who was actually Paula Brooks, and had played convincingly for many years a deaf lesbian mother of three who was a surfer and whose girlfriend and father were both closely involved in the U.S. military intelligence, and who was deaf, so couldn't speak online over Skype with her co-editors. Yes. But her father, the major, would sometimes speak with them. So they're both really good examples of sock puppets, and you can see the sock puppets. I'm just illustrating that in case people don't know what it means. But we have a special term for people who talk to themselves online and create various identities. You can either argue with yourself or you can agree with yourself. Either way, you become more important. You draw attention to your conversations. I wanted to say that I think that all of these hoaxes and other false identity situations like astroturfing, political astroturfing, can be put into context that online writers are part of the history, literary history, and writing, literary production in general, and that the history of online writing is older than the web. So I just wanted to say that there were mailing lists and Usenet before we had the web, and that culture was already familiar with the dynamic of people who come into a community and completely, swindle it. So I'm fascinated with that in general, and with information spread and news seen through the lens of gossip. Around 2005, I began talking about the political use of sock puppets. I sort of had an amateur interest in these kinds of hoaxes. And I was giving talks at technical conferences theorizing that if governments had any sense, which they probably did, and if I could think of it, other people could think of the idea, that they would be creating deep cover agents online. People who are blogging, who are joining social networks, who are establishing a footprint on the internet over time, a broad footprint that would be convincing. Some validation of this idea, it's completely tinfoil hat. It sounds a little bit crazy, but I think that it is certainly possible that has been happening around the world for some time. The 2010 hack by Anonymous of the company, security company HB Gary, revealed that there was a US government project calling for proposals for persona management software, which would allow a single person, like an app that would sit on your desktop, that would allow a single person to manage all the social media network accounts for, say, 20 to 30 personas at once. So you could log into all the different ones, and you could set their styles and what networks they use. Like maybe some of them have a MySpace, and this other one doesn't have a MySpace, they have a Facebook, etc. Also, just to give this a little bit more context, there are sock puppets, but there's also astroturfing, and the idea of astroturfing is of fake grassroots. I think this is a little bit of the idea of the 50 Cent Army, and ideas like that. People are paid, or people are falsely created, accounts are created in order to give the impression that there is a broad political social movement when it's actually something that's paid for, like an advertising campaign. I get a lot of questions in this investigation about why people would believe. Why would you believe in someone you've only met online? And I think part of why these stories succeed and why Amina was so popular is that people want to believe whatever makes an excellent story. It has to be dramatic, and it has to be very personal in its angle. And these things can be benign, or they can, they could be possibly politically motivated, or they could also be some kind of psychological disorder. Munchausen by internet is very interesting to read about. If you look it up, you can find descriptions of this term, which is of people who are fabulists, who spin these stories, but specifically who spin them about having an illness. So they create a persona that is deeply disempowered in some way. Community involving several websites that was basically masquerading as a community of women who had been Democrats and supporters of Hillary Clinton, who then, when Obama won the primary in the US in 2008, turned Republican. So, but if you, this was reported widely in the media as a real social movement, but if you looked at all at it in depth, it was fairly obvious that the ways and the patterns of its movements and its communication, that it was completely fake. So, maybe not completely fake. I believe that some people maybe had that, path politically, but it wasn't a mass movement. Time of posting, I'm just going to keep going back to that, but the time of posting is one of the crucial patterns to look at. If the posts all happen 1 minute apart, somebody wrote a script to do that and weren't very careful to randomize the time intervals. So, tools, I think, for collaboration are very important. And one thing I found out in this Amina investigation is that we didn't have great tools for sharing information. Yes, we have wikis. Etherpad is pretty good, but it becomes an enormous mess. You end up with enormous flat files of data, of links to pictures. You end up really having to document and screen grab everything that happens. If you're documenting something that happens online, you're basically a reporter reporting on the internet things that are happening on the internet. There's no real event to actually report on or document. So screen grabs are crucial. Basically just getting everything that you can. Sucking down, you can use tools to mirror or grab the entire content of a website, of a domain, with all the comments. So when we did that, we would share them. We would share those files with other people researching this issue. And this was all happening very quickly with the Amina investigation over maybe a few days, but it kept going for weeks and weeks as we confirmed many, many details. And again, we tried to confirm with each other that we were real by using Skype. And that doesn't necessarily prove anything, because you could be anyone. But at least we would know that we had some similarity to who we claimed to be. I wanted to make the point here that journalists who are professional investigative reporters have a lot of particular skills that I don't actually have. I'm not a professional journalist. I'm a writer and a blogger, and I work for tech companies in Silicon Valley. But I am also a person with a fairly long history on the internet pre-web. And what I saw from that is that marginalized communities in general have a lot of specialized knowledge that is useful in this kind of case to do with community identity and the construction of truth. In particular, I would say the social construction of truth and history. And that the commonalities I see here are that dissidents, activists, and hackers know a lot about this because they have some reason to conceal their identity in some way, either with pseudonymity or actual anonymity. And so they're familiar with other people who are concealing their identity, trying to work with them in the problems that then arise, because it's very hard to validate each other and to develop social trust. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans people who are obscuring their identity to some extent, but who want to represent themselves with some degree of truth and authenticity online in order to find other people and to have public conversations in a public forum, but without, being thrown out of their family, having some kind of terrible custody battle for children, all kinds, being fired from your job, political repercussions. Many bad things can happen, and that's changing in some places, but not consistently for everyone. So that's another community that knows a lot about pseudonymity and lightly fictionalizing one's life, maybe to some degree, and then the dangers of being outed, for example. So if you think about the politics of outing, that should relate very closely to issues of identity in these sorts of online cases. I think women who are in domestic violence, who are experienced with domestic violence situations, have also some reason to conceal their identity and yet to be able to participate in online life. cultural creators hiding from copyright, law repercussions. So people who do video remixes, for example, and don't want to be sued by, Paramount. They also have developed many cultural standards around identity and protecting each other's identity in this way. So I think these kinds of things are vulnerabilities on the surface, but they result in particular skills and community strength and, again, culture. And all of these things played into the Amina investigation so that we, in some sense, triangulated on the things that didn't ring true about Amina's story, and the things that then ultimately revealed Tom McMaster's identity. I don't know how much time I have here, but if I have a couple more minutes.
Slowly come to an end.
Yeah. One of the reasons that this is important is, for example, I do have the important fact about liars for journalists is that when you actually find the person doing the hoax, you shouldn't just believe their story, that their confession is the real story, because they will just keep changing the story to what you want to hear. But the point I wanted to make about why this is important, obviously it's important for political reasons, but I think that it can be very important for these marginalized communities and for people's ability to actually trust each other. So across the Middle East, because Amina, Gay Girl in Damascus, was representing herself as a fierce activist, out and proud in Damascus, encouraging other people in the Middle East to come out of the closet, to be in public, to risk whatever it is that they were going to be risking. The revelation of the hoax, the detention itself, meant that people within Syria stopped communicating outside to journalists and human rights activists outside of Syria for days. There was just nobody wanted to talk because nobody knew who was real or what the situation was or whether there was serious danger. Amina disappeared in her supposed detention, on the way to meet the journalist from The Guardian who was going to interview her. So that freaked everybody out, and people didn't want to meet, and local committees of people within Damascus were extremely frightened by this situation. But beyond that, across the Middle East, a lot of gay and lesbian activists and bloggers were suspicious of each other. So I think that the fallout from that and the other people that were revealed to be perhaps not completely genuine in who they were representing themselves to be, still has repercussions today in people's ability to organize. So.
Okay. Thanks a lot for this interesting presentation. I like this case study very much because it shows that, of course, on the internet, not everything is true, what you can find there, but it also shows that the internet delivers the tools and the instruments just to tell fact from fiction. And in the OSCE context, we often hear that there is a difference between professional, traditional journalism and new, whatever, online writers, hobby journalists, citizen journalists. And I think this collaborative approach of the blogosphere, bloggers, tech guys, and traditional journalists to uncover the story shows that it's maybe not that important where you come from, what platform you come from, whether it's an editorial office or a blogger, and maybe when judging whether something is journalism or it isn't, you should rather look at the product, look at the outcome, look at the quality of the journalistic piece, and not so much whether somebody is employed by an editorial office or is just a blogger on his own. In any way, we saw that those new technologies, those new media are changing society, are changing the way we deal with news. And before we will open the floor for questions, our next presentation is by Leonard Novi, taking a taking a look into the future of how these new media will change societies, or social change will happen in the future.
Thank you, thank you very much, Christian. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm sure there are already many questions now after 4 really exciting presentations, and we don't have much time left, so I'll try to cut my presentation as I go. What I won't be doing much is make projections, because I think it's really difficult to do, to make linear projections. Needless to say, I'm sure there will be changes, future changes, and there will be future game changes, technologically speaking. I mean, what happens when speech becomes text on the web? I mean, content will explode exponentially. Also, I mean, when we're talking about the future of journalism, there'll be regulatory changes. Perhaps in Germany, we're talking about fair use, Leistungsschutzrecht. This again will change the perspectives and the parameters for professional journalism. What I want to do, and I'll try to make it in 10 minutes, is to connect a few dots and talk about professional journalism as a product and as a profession, and how that relates to broader social changes. And this is, I think, a necessary step we should take. Now, doing so, one has to bear in mind that these changes have to be seen in country-specific structures and traditions. So my talk will be based on observations, made in Germany, some other Western industrialized democracies. And this is to say that the lessons learned and the best practices that I'll be talking about, they won't be immediately applicable elsewhere. Nevertheless, I think there are some broader social changes that are universally true or universally valid. Now, coming from Germany, there's a lot of talk about, the crisis of journalism, about the loss of quality, about fragmentation and the imminent death of the newspaper. And we have indeed seen a number of newspapers, both at the local and the national level, closing down. There's a marked degree of cultural pessimism in Germany at the moment when it comes to talking about professional journalism. This just, I think, testifies to the transition period that we're in at the moment. And I would argue that, the discourse that we have on the future of journalism, that really stands in a striking disproportion to the scope of the technological and also to the scope of the social and the cultural changes that have taken hold of our societies. And more importantly, it also stands in a striking disproportion to the necessity to really deal with the question what this is all about, after all. I mean, are we talking about printed paper as a recording medium? Are we talking about, the cultural form of journalism in its 20th century shape? Or shouldn't we really be talking about the question how independent journalism that adheres to certain professional and ethical standards, how this can fulfill its functions for democracy and be profitable under changing technological and social conditions? I believe this is the central strategic question that we should be talking about. And part of the equation at a tactical level, is the transition from print to online, and the question how you can actually organize this within the next 1 or 2 decades without losing people on the way. And part of the equation also is how you actually engage with the audience. But looking only at technology, I believe, misses the mark. The media need to be understood as an integral part of the wider social system. And the relatively stable history of the mass media that we've seen, for the second half of the 20th century in any case, this relatively stable history of the concept of the mass media in our heads, this really shouldn't let us forget that cultural, social, and also technological changes have always transformed journalism, have always changed communicative structures in society. And this is what we're witnessing these days. And the picture is a bit ambivalent, I would argue. I mean, we've talked a lot about, the great potential of the internet when it comes to freedom of opinion, freedom of information, and certainly digital media have led to a revitalization of journalism in many regards. We've already heard a lot about, eyewitness reports these days. We've heard about journalism that's done outside traditional editorial professional structures, so-called post-industrial journalism. We could talk about, the expert sites that are run by non-professional journalism and nevertheless have evolved into central and reliable sources when it comes to certain topics. Goddard's being one example. It's about the Supreme Court in the US. I'm just going to skim through these, but an interesting project in any case. Niche sites such as Syria Deeply, which focus on Syria, single-issue website, filling in niches where traditional news media are arguably not fulfilling their their functions properly anymore. And also, and very exciting, of course, new formats of soliciting and presenting data journalism, new formats generally for journalism like Ushahidi and so on, developments that often originate in civil society rather than in professional journalism. So these are all exciting developments that professional journalism needs to take into account and needs to incorporate into its own logics. But then again, there are also problems, as always, when it comes to such transition periods. There are not only opportunities, there are also risks, side effects, losses, and losers. And the picture, of course, is less rosy when you consider the freedom of the press and freedom of information, freedom of opinion to refer to, the independence of the press. And Paul Starr, the eminent American scholar, has indeed argued that if you do so, you, of course, have to state that there's a significant decrease in institutional capacity of the press, with severe consequences for democracy in many countries already. I would argue that journalism, because of the developments that we're seeing on the web, is in many segments probably better than ever before. And at the same time, resources decrease in many regions, in many segments, and the supply with quality journalism cannot be taken for granted. And the reasons, of course, are partly cyclical, and partly cyclical in a sense they have to do with the economic downturn that we've witnessed over the past years, but they also relate to broader fundamental changes that are largely but not exclusively connected to the rise of the digital media, which undermines classic business models, undermines, as I stated earlier, the very concept of the mass media. In that sense, I would argue the internet is an indicator and a factor of broader social trends. Many of these trends were indeed nascent before. When you look at usage patterns, when you look at the declining circulation of many newspapers, these are trends that we've seen since the 80s or 90s, at least in Germany. Nevertheless, individualization, generally the questioning of authorities, new forms of self-expression and participation, all these are trends that have a driver medium with the internet. And so in that sense, we're seeing a challenge to established intermediaries and institutions of representative democracy. The media on the one hand, but I do believe there's a striking parallel here, because these are, of course, developments that challenge other institutions as well. You could argue that political parties, for example, also traditionally institutions that sort of integrate society, bundle products, you could argue, that convey worldviews that have traditionally been seen as a sense-making practice of democracy. These institutions are also challenged by these broader social trends. Now, whereas political parties have lost their de facto monopoly of will formation and representing the interests of society, professional journalism with organized editing structures has lost its exclusive position as the transmitter of information and social self-understanding. And the ramifications of this are, of course, severe. The very value of news is put into question, monetary, but also culturally and socially. Now, what are the consequences of this? Of course, in times of communicative abundance, in times of communication overflow, professional journalism is more important than ever, at least I would argue. Journalism is not obsolete, but it's displaced. It has to change and adapt to changing circumstances. In that sense, we need to move away from thinking in terms of delivery technologies, from thinking in terms of single genres or organizational forms. And we need to move towards the very central and strategic question, how, in light of these new technological, cultural, and economic conditions, journalism can meet the actual needs and expectations of society. And in that sense, I'm just going to skip through these. In that sense, sorry, got a bit lost here. In that sense, it is the move from the production of initial observations to a role that emphasizes the very core journalistic values in a new context. Curation, contextualization, complexity reduction, storytelling, responsiveness, all these, you could argue, are very old journalistic values, but presented in somewhat new bottles, as the number of formats and the variability of audiences have grown. And my argument is that traditional legacy news organizations haven't really made use of the full potential that the internet presents. There's a tendency to use social media as a marketing ploy rather than engaging with readers and really incorporating and inviting users and readers to participate. In that sense, networked on more open and transparent journalism that invites readers to participate can make meaningful contributions to the professional work of journalists, but also have a positive effect on trust and brand loyalty and success on the social graph. So let me close by saying that the demand for professional journalism, its function for democracy and its social acceptance, and thereby also its economic viability, depends on the extent to which it embraces, it really comprehensively embraces the broader social changes that are epitomized in the internet. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Leonard, for putting things into the broader picture. I think the diversity of presentations we heard here showed that it's a topic that is very wide and that we are only beginning to approach this topic. We began a little late, so we will stay a little longer here, especially as you might have questions. There will be a reception going on upstairs, so please be brief in your questions and then actually ask questions and refrain from lengthy statements, if I may kindly ask. And maybe we take 3 questions in a row and then give it back to the panel for answers. Catherine, you here.
Yes. Well, my question is whether or not, when you're measuring the results of social media in terms of how many views it has or how many shares, whether this is in fact harking back to old broadcast media, which is judged by what the audience size is, and whether there really has to be more question of what's the conversion to action. And I saw it with Occupy. I covered that extensively too, and it degenerated into the news media was a sacred space, and originally anyone could go into it. 3 months into it, it was like, get out of my space. I have my interview with CNN at 2 p.m., you know, and I'm going to shine on for CNN and not my network of Twitter followers. And so it wasn't persuasive in the end, and it didn't reach the ideas. There were a lot of reasons for why it wasn't, but I think there's I'm just trying to understand what could you use to measure effectiveness of, since it's social media, what is the social impact? It's what Anna was saying about, you know, how does the agenda get set?
Thank you. Maybe 2 more questions if we have. Do we see any more hands up? Maybe then we'll just answer this one and give it.
I'll start. You can, in many ways, argue that my research is just like the old viewing numbers for television or something like that. There is one difference, and that is, in many ways, it don't take anything at all to sit in the couch and watch television. But if you like something, if you share something, if you comment, even no, but actually, I found that not that many stories is shared, liked, and commented on Facebook or Twitter or Google Plus or LinkedIn or whatever. So not that many stories is going viral. So you could argue that the person who shares, likes, or comment or whatever is taking a very serious choice about it. Does it fit my personal profile on the web, my virtual personality? Is it in conflict with my work or whatever? So people is actually thinking about doing it. So it's not just the click that counts, it's the thought as well, I think. So I think it's a bit more than the viewing numbers. It's a bit different, you can argue, at least. But yeah, you don't... I would love if Facebook gave me all the comments so I could make a research on what people actually are writing about the articles, but there's a little bit privacy and so on, so that's a shame.
I mean, it's an odd thing because oftentimes you measure the success of social media by it being picked up by the mainstream media. an idea that starts there jumps over, and oftentimes, so a lot of social media is just forwarding links from mainstream media, and I don't know that that's an accurate measure of success, given that social media is supposed to be something other than mainstream media. And but the problem is that those metrics don't really exist. I mean, what is a Facebook like compared to a Twitter retweet compared to, Phil, I'm sure could answer this question a lot better than I, but what value does that have in a larger media ecosystem? I don't know.
I think that you could measure that impact to action if you look at specific incidents or events, because we know that often a Facebook, share does result in a specific action being taken, like a protest or a rally.
И я абсолютно согласна с коллегами. Есть еще одна вещь, если касаться сравнения сети с телевизором. Если вы подумаете о том, как вы смотрите телевизор и как вы общаетесь с экраном компьютера, собственно, в контексте нашего разговора разница только одна. Пока телевизор с вами не разговаривает. Экран с лайком и смайлом, этими значками, с вами разговаривает. Вы себя с ним соотносите. Вы получаете одобрение, вы чувствуете себя членом сообщества, и это и есть очень важная включенность, человеческая и эмоциональная. Ее очень трудно померить. Но вот этот важный фактор интерактивности, которого нет впрямую ни у одного традиционного медиа, конечно, создает вот этот эффект.
Позвольте задать вопрос, который связан с сегодняшним выступлением президента Российской. Позвольте задать вопрос, который связан с сегодняшним выступлением президента Российской Федерации господина Путина, который как будто присутствует на нашей конференции. Он заявил, что в связи с тем, что в Российской Федерации очень много радикально настроенных общественных организаций, людей, то государство должно таких радикалов изолировать от интернета. Как вы относитесь к этой идее нашего российского президента? Пожалуйста, любой из участников может ответить.
Okay, I get the feeling that nobody is really feeling like commenting on what the president of the Russian Federation said today. But we thanks for the statement anyway, and yeah. Sure?
I won't comment on what Putin said because that's not up my alley, and well, no way. But you could say that one of my concern is that you're actually giving the power to private companies, just like we were into with the Wall Street movement, Occupy Wall Street movement. You put you give Facebook, Twitter, AT&T, and so on so much control that they can actually give or take life on the web. If they block one website, they can use lose all the revenue, all the ad money, and so on. So a lot of control is in the hand of private companies, and that could be argued as a problem. I'm not saying it is, but maybe.
Ronnie? Coming.
I was fascinated by Elizabeth's presentation, and I'd like to know whether she can give us an idea of just how widespread that kind of thing is, and what kind of sanctions could there be for the people who perpetrate hoaxes like that. And I'd also like to comment that as a professional journalist, I think that she gives too much respect to the likelihood that professional journalists will uncover hoaxes like that, because after all, There's the classic case of Janet Cook, as Janet Cook fooled the editors of the Washington Post. She fooled the Pulitzer Committee, and she got a false Pulitzer Prize for a totally fake story.
I think that's a temptation for many people, including professional journalists, that if you have a political ideal and you feel that you can tell the story better than the real people to represent their cause, that's a very dangerous idea. So I guess whenever I hear someone say they're going to be a voice for the voiceless, that's when I want to reach for my metaphorical gun. You know, that's a danger signal. If someone thinks that they're speaking for someone else who can't speak, I would be very suspicious that that's really true. And I would look to the saying of nothing about us, you know, without us, that is common in the disability community, that if you're going to have a story about a cause or a person, you definitely need to include that person. I think that that's common in human rights activism as well. For example, like if you happen to know a lot about, say, a refugee camp in the Sudan, you might be tempted to start blogging as if you are one of those refugees in order to represent the story. I think it would be better to focus on giving the tools to the people in that situation so they can speak for themselves.
Do we have any more questions? Any more there? Just in a second. Yeah.
Is it on? I had a specific question for Timothy Carr, perhaps because of the fact that I work for an organization that is called Free Press Unlimited. So there's, you focus very much on the additional rights that are necessary. But something that is often lacking in discussion about citizen journalism is the need for training. In the sense that that's what the organization I work for does, is train people who want to be citizen journalists. Not so much in, because it's necessary because, I mean, it's necessary because they need to adhere to journalistic standards and whatnot, but very much for their own protection. Because a good written story, which is neutral and just brings the fact, also very much protect the people who write it or film it. And I wonder what your experience is with that, especially with the Occupy movement, and to what extent that this part was incorporated into it.
It was interesting because there were, part of the Occupy movement was not simply, you know, marching and protesting, but they occupied a public space and there were teach-ins. There were all sorts of activities going around. And one of the things that they did focus on was journalism training or citizen journalism training. And there was a session that I participated in about your right to record so that citizens know, or journalists know, that when they are holding up their camera and recording an arrest and the cop says, you can't do that, they can say, well, the First Amendment gives me the right to do this, and continue filming with some confidence. But yes, training is needed, certainly, and people should avail themselves of that. But at the same time, I think anybody who has a smartphone who's on a scene and knows how to use their smartphone should use it. And I get a little bit. I have a little concern when we get around this discussion, and I don't think that you're raising this, but the discussion of defining what is and what isn't a journalist. It's a very good discussion to have, but I don't like it when it veers into that territory of precluding people from taking those types of pictures.
That is also, if I may, something we experience in the OSCE context a lot, whether somebody is a journalist or isn't, and that's always something that only makes sense if there's privileges connected with your status as a journalist. And so my approach would always be to, why should journalists be more privileged than any other person reporting on issues of public interest? So maybe that's just the solution, that the right to freedom of expression, the right to freedom of the media is not limited to editorial offices, but it's a personal, human, basic fundamental right. So anybody can be a journalist, and if he works like a journalist, and if the outcome is fair and well, if it adheres to journalistic standards, which of course, I mean, if you take it from Germany, I don't know, Bild-Zeitung or those tabloid papers, even traditional media outlets not always adhere to the highest professional standards. So I think there is something it really deserves a close look at the specific product. Do we have any more questions? I think one or two, one in the back over there, another one, and then that will be the last question then.
Russian, please. I will speak Russian. Я очень сильно согласна с тем, что вы сейчас сказали. Я вот перед тем, как вы взяли микрофон, вот это и хотела сказать. Потому что я из Таджикистана, прошу прощения, меня зовут Парвина Ибодова. Я представляю НГО, которая занимается policy, интернет-policy. Вы знаете, у нас специфическая ситуация с интернетом, с развитием технологий. В технологическом плане у нас отлично все, технологии развиваются, но с policy бывают проблемы. Иногда вот стандартно после того, как собираются наши старшие братья из России, Казахстана, Китая в рамках ШОС или ОДКБ, что-то воспринимают, и у нас все это на нас пробируется. Что я хочу сказать? На самом деле журналисты становятся иногда виновниками или причинами того, что наши полисмейкеры начинают вот изворачиваться и все наизнанку переворачивать. Например, та арабская весна, которая прошла, в нашей стране нашими журналистами была показана как интернет был показан как основной источник этой весны. То есть там не было других. Там была и революция, потому что там был интернет. И наши, к сожалению, там, те же чиновники, те, кто принимает какие-то решения, восприняли это с таким воодушевлением и начали опять возвращать нас к тому, что нам нужен закон об интернете. Нам нужно регулировать интернет. И связали это все с тем, что в итоге мы сумели это перенести опять, что интернет это СМИ. И пытались в рамки закона о СМИ, проекта закона о СМИ, поставить вот такое равноправие. Интернет это СМИ. Я поэтому вот еще раз говорю, что от журналистов больше зависит то, что они делают, потому что это очень опасно. А в нашем случае вот мы каждый день с этим сталкиваемся, пытаемся до них донести, что все-таки вот нужно быть аккуратным. Да, прав у них много, а обязанности почему-то не всегда помнят они. Спасибо.
Thank you. Does anybody want to comment on the intervention? You're totally right. I mean that there is a responsibility with journalists, and the right to freedom of expression, of course, that does not include the right to spread false information or rumors or something. And then again, that whether the internet or not qualifies as a media or not, that only is relevant if there are some privileges connected with this. So I would again say that everybody should be free to express themselves, being professional journalist or citizen journalist or whatever. With this, we are. Let's move this question to the reception that is going on upstairs for already 15 minutes now. Make sure to pick up one of these books. They're available in English and Russian. And I would like to thank the interpreters for their work here. I would like to thank you as the audience and, of course, our speakers here for their presentations. Thanks a lot.